Session on Soviet plans for peace, only to learn it was already too late. Britain's Prime Minister spoke to Mr. Bush and other Allied leaders from Chequers today. He said he appreciated all the diplomatic efforts, but with the Iraqis systematically destroying Kuwait, battle had to be joined. And he had this message for families of British servicemen.
It will not, I believe, be a long conflict, but it may be a fierce one. There is no doubt in my mind that it is an absolutely justifiable conflict and that we will win it. As soon as that is confirmed, we will bring home the men who have been engaged in it at the earliest possible time.
Thousands of American, British, French and Arab troops, supported by tanks, are involved in the Allied offensive.
By dawn this morning, Allied bombers had flown scores of sorties against Iraqi positions in occupied Kuwait. This was the scene at one Allied airbase in Saudi Arabia. Flying time from here to the nearest Iraqi targets is no more than 30 minutes. The hope is that in the next few days, the American Apache assault helicopter, never before used in war, will come into its own. As an Apache crosses the border in the early hours, Allied rocket launchers on the horizon bombard the Iraqis. This is an Apache attack on an Iraqi observation tower.
Watch him, he's right off our nose.
Kuwaiti exile sources here in Dhahran say the Allies are doing well, but the coalition military machine will give no specific details of the advance.
The latest Iraqi military communique has claimed that the Allied advance has failed totally. Earlier, Saddam Hussein urged his troops to stand up to the onslaught of the Allied forces, and in a radio broadcast he repeatedly appealed to his forces to fight. Otherwise, he said, Iraq would descend into a deep darkness.
You will begin the last invasion, and the war will come to an end. You will vanquish them, and you will have glory and honor for your people, your army, and your nation. And with the fighting of the men, the sophisticated weapons of the enemy will have no meaning.
That's it for now. Our next scheduled news is at 1 o'clock.
In 25 minutes, we'll be opening up the Country File with John Craven. First on BBC One, we've this week's edition of our magazine programme for the deaf and hard of hearing. See here.
Programme Holidays. Where will you be going for your summer break? We'll be asking the experts what the prospects are for holidays this year.
Also, we'll be looking at an important law which the legal profession, and one MP in particular, are trying to amend.
Mike Aston will be telling us about his motorcycle trip across the USA and Canada, and we've got some information about Tessa.
The United States and Canada are great places to explore. North America is so large, it offers a wealth of opportunity to any traveller with a sense of adventure. This is Mike Aston from Coventry, and last year he went on a motorcycle trip across the USA and Canada. Mike, what a beautiful bike. Now, you did this huge trip around America and Canada. Why? Well, I've always been interested in adventure, doing lots of different things. And about 2 years ago, I was reading through a motorcycle magazine, and there was an advertisement in there. A picture of a bike in Monument Valley, and someone saying they'd been on this trip, and it was just sounded fascinating. So I just planned it from there, and it took me 2 years to get it sorted out. And it took 2 years to get a place. because of the cost involved. I mean, I knew it was going to be expensive, but it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, really. So how much are you talking about? Well, there was the cost of the flight for my bike and myself. That was £2,000 for a start. But then again, when I was in America, travelling was actually very cheap. So during your trip, was there any danger or risk, or was it just a nice, gentle, easy trip? Well, both, really. The most beautiful place I went through was one of the national parks. It was fantastic. Just so much different scenery and different animals I saw. And there was 3,500 square miles of this park, Yellowstone Park. So what's your next plan, Mike? What are you going to do next? Well, I'd like to ride through the Eastern Bloc countries, I think. Do a trip around there and ride up to Finland, down through Norway and Sweden. It's about 6,000 miles altogether. I'm hoping to go with a group of deaf bikers sometime in the near future. Mike, thank you very much, and the best of luck with this next trip. Thank you.
Many of you will have seen the name Tessa bandied about on billboards and in the papers. So what is it? Well, in last year's budget, the Chancellor announced the introduction of a tax-exempt special savings account, which is Tessa for short. And this would encourage people to save over a period of 5 years, and all the interest earned by the savings would be tax-free. So far, so good. However, there are, as you'd expect, a few restrictions. Here's the Interpledge with some information which may help you to decide whether a Tessa account is right for you.
Now, only one Tessa account is allowed per person at any one time. And Tessa can only be held in a sole name. Joint accounts are not allowed. You must also be aged 18 or over to open a Tessa account. Now, the maximum deposit is £9,000 over a 5-year term. You can have any figure below that, but the maximum is 9,000. And you can deposit up to £3,000 in the first year, and the balance of up to 9,000 is payable over the next 4 years. Now, at the end of 5 years, you take your money out, and you can open a new Tessa account, going through the same procedure again. You must also leave the money in for 5 years if you wish to receive tax-free interest. You can't touch the capital. You can withdraw the interest, but then that interest is taxable. Now, we have some figures which will illustrate the differences that are being offered by various savings accounts, so that you have a better idea of the differential rates being offered. We've based the figures over a 5-year term, as you're unable to have Tessa for less anyway. These figures, we must stress, are only general figures based on the old rates. They may vary a little between different banks and building societies. If you're planning to invest, you might wish to consider 2 other things. Interest rates may vary over the next 5 years, including Tessa, and you may need the money that you've tied up in Tessa for another purpose, to buy a car, improve your home, and so on. But remember, you can't take the money out. There are many special promotional schemes being offered by the banks and building societies. So if you're really interested, why not pop along and find out more about Tessa? We now come to one of the most serious items we've ever done on See Here. and one which should be of great concern to all deaf people. It's also one which you could do something about. The story goes back 5 years to 1986. Here's how it was reported on the 9 o'clock news.
A deaf-mute man was freed today from indefinite detention in a hospital where he was sent after allegedly stealing £5 and 3 light bulbs. Now that a mental health tribunal has allowed Glenn Pearson home, his family is trying to have the law changed. They say other handicapped people could be detained indefinitely if they're unable to plead guilty or not guilty. John Thirlwell reports.
As a mentally handicapped deaf-mute, Glenn Pearson was locked up because he couldn't make a plea to the court. After 2.5 months of detention, he can now go free because a mental health tribunal accepted he was a victim of bad law. His supporters now want similarly handicapped people protected from such law.
There is the possibility of this situation arising tomorrow. It could very easily happen. And of course, the person then would be in exactly the same position as Glenn's found himself, unfit to plead and detained. The law says he must be detained.
So something has to be done straight away?
Very quickly. I mean, we have illustrated with this case the shortcomings of this ridiculous act.
I mean, any handicapped people go to court, they could be put away like my son done, because he couldn't plead guilty. I mean, anyone handicapped, just go to court and that'd be it. They took away from their family.
The Lord Chancellor's office has already been contacted by lawyers handling this case. And now the pressure for the Criminal Procedure Insanity Act to be put right or repealed can only intensify.
Under the Criminal Procedure Insanity Act 1964, people who are unfit to plead must be detained indefinitely in a hospital without trial and without any determination of whether they did in fact commit the act of which they have been accused, regardless of the severity of the offence. Similarly, people who are found not guilty by reason of insanity suffer the same consequence, automatic and indeterminate detention. And what's all this got to do with deaf people? I have here a letter from Dr. Monteiro, who is consultant psychiatrist for the Preston Health Authority, who says,
I am of the opinion that it is crucially important for people with serious communication difficulties to be properly assessed. This is particularly important in the case of deaf people who, if found unfit to plead, have to be sent to a hospital without limit to time under current legislation.
Let's go back to the case featured on the news. Here's what the Law Society had to say.
Glenn Pearson is profoundly deaf, without speech and of limited intelligence. He often used to wander uninvited into the homes of local people who knew him and made him welcome. One day he wandered further afield and entered the house of people new to the area. He was found with 3 light bulbs and a £5 note. Was he committing a burglary? As he was unfit to plead, no one could find out. He was detained indefinitely in a psychiatric hospital until a mental health review tribunal discharged him.
All that happened over 4 years ago. The need for change is great, but nothing much has in fact changed, even though the Butler Report on mentally abnormal offenders put forward proposals to amend the law in the mid-1970s. Successive governments have failed to give priority to this issue. But now the legal profession itself, through the Law Society, has decided to do something about it. Here's Paul Bacon, who was Glenn Pearson's solicitor, to explain what he's trying to achieve.
Glenn's case clearly illustrates the deficiencies in the law as it stands at present. You see, Glenn was unable to enter a plea, and because of that, the court weren't able to make any assessment of the value of the case. Equally, because he was unable to enter a plea, when the court decided that he was unfit to plead, they had only one course of action. That was to send him away indefinitely. The new bill is intended to change that. First of all, to give the court a right, and indeed an obligation, to look at the facts, have what's going to be called a trial of the facts, so that each defendant can have his case heard even though he may not be able to take part in the case itself. For example, with Glenn, he used to wander into the homes of people in his village, Now, if it had been possible to call evidence from those people, they'd have been able to say Glenn was quite harmless, that maybe when he wandered into that house, he was just doing what he's been used to doing, having a cup of tea and going on his way. And it might be that the court would have said, well, in that case, Glenn should be discharged, and the case would have been over, and that would have been it. If, however, the court had decided, having heard all the evidence, that he was unfit to plead, but there was something in the allegations being made, the next stage would be reached, and this is where the second part of the bill will change things. At present, you would go away indefinitely, sometimes to a special hospital. In Glenn's case, he went to a mental hospital which was clearly inappropriate. He wasn't mentally ill, he was only slightly mentally handicapped. Now, the law will now give the judges a right to choose a whole range of disposals. They could decide, of course, in a very serious case, perhaps where somebody killed someone, that they might be detained without limit of time, with restrictions, just as they can at the moment. But they might allow for detention, but with a right to be discharged at some point in the future. They can also provide for supervision, or for guardianship, or, for example, to give an absolute discharge if the case is so trivial. That's how the court might have decided Glenn's case. Supervision, of course, would give the court the power to suggest helpful treatment. Glenn, unfortunately, had never learned sign language, and so he wasn't able to communicate his intentions to those representing him. And how helpful it would have been if the judge could have said, in Glenn's case, Glenn, we want you to be on a supervision order and to learn sign language. That would have been an admirable disposal in that case. Hopefully this law is going to allow the courts to have those choices and to help people who are faced with this difficulty.
But now Paul Bacon and the Law Society have a problem. They may want it to happen, but first they have to get it through Parliament. In this case, the government has decided that it has no time to include this bill in its legislative programme, so it's up to individual MPs to get it passed. MPs can do this in several ways. For example, they can introduce a bill under what's called the 10-minute rule, when the subject can be debated in the House for 10 minutes. This is usually to test the opinion of Parliament before introducing the subject seriously. This was done in 1986 by Glen Pearson's MP, Edward Lee. It was lost through lack of government support. If they are lucky, they can introduce a private member's bill. At the beginning of the parliamentary session, 20 MPs' names are drawn in a ballot, and then MPs are usually approached by pressure groups to introduce a bill on their behalf.
Number 202 is Mr. Dudley Fishburn.
Number 238.
Paul Bacon's bill was adopted by John Greenway, Conservative MP for Rydale, and on the 5th of December 1990 the bill had its first reading. Now, John Greenway was lucky to be chosen in the ballot and to get his bill through its first reading. But now it's hard work all the way, because many bills on their second reading can be destroyed by just one MP shouting object, even if the other 600 should be in favour of it.
Northern Ireland Emergency Provisions, Mr. Secretary Brooke. Question of the motion on the order paper. As many as other objection taken.
Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
Question is that this House do now adjourn, Mr. Cyril Townsend.
John, welcome. Now, you're the sponsoring MP for this bill. Why did you choose this particular one?
Well, I'm very interested in criminal justice matters. I've just been sitting on the Criminal Justice Bill Standing Committee. I'm disappointed that this measure wasn't included in it, but it does seem to me that we ought to do more to protect vulnerable people in the law, the way the law deals with them. And there is such overwhelming support from professional associations like the Law Society and special interest groups that they want this measure on the statute book. I thought that it was a very appropriate measure for me to bring forward.
Now, if it gets through, when do you think it will get royal assent?
Oh, well, that remains to be seen. I think the first hurdle is to get the second reading on Friday and find time to have a proper committee stage, because it is quite a technical bill.
Now, we showed the video clip there where someone failed on their second reading. How do you think people can assist you with your second reading on Friday?
I think that it would be very helpful if people could write to their MP and say, we support this bill, and also write to the Home Secretary. He's been very helpful and is supporting it, but it will help us perhaps to get committee time if the government knows that there are a lot of people out there who want this measure on the statute book.
John, thank you very much.
Thank you.
If you would like any further information, or if you know of any case where either someone has been found to be unfit to plead, or where someone may have been advised to plead guilty rather than risk being found unfit to plead, please contact Penny Letts, the Law Society, 50 Chancery Lane, London WC2A 1SX. That's Penny Letts, the Law Society, 50 Chancery Lane, London WC2A 1SX.
If you're fed up with all the cold weather we've been having, then stay tuned, because we're going to take your mind away from winter and look forward to the hot days of summer. We've invited Angela Leaney of the Holiday Care Service and Nigel Coombs from BBC Radio 4's Breakaway programme. Hello.
Hello.
Now, Nigel, I know a lot of people will be worried about the effect of the Gulf War on travel, particularly those wanting to go abroad. So what advice can you give them?
Well, the only advice I can really give them is to wait and see, because we just don't know what's going to happen in the Gulf. Nobody is going to any of the countries around the Gulf area. They're not even going to Cyprus, which is quite a way away. So we just have to wait and see. Nobody knows what's going to happen.
So does that mean it's going to be better to wait a while before we book our holidays?
Oh, I think so. As soon as the Gulf War ends, then all the travel companies will decide where it's safe to go to, and then we will have an enormous choice. You see, already people are going to places like Spain because they think that's safer. Well, it might be safe to go back to Tunisia, it might be safe to go to Morocco, so it might be safe to go anywhere. So if we wait and see, then we won't have any problems at all.
Now, where are people likely to find bargains at the moment?
Well, there are some very good bargains around. There is one company that I know of which is selling holidays to Hong Kong for just over £400. I went to China for about the same price. You can go to Australia for under £500, and you can go to New Zealand for £600. Because people aren't travelling, all the airlines and the travel companies are giving away selected bargains. So if you go into your travel agent, you can certainly find some very good deals.
Now, presumably with the situation as it is in the Gulf and with the wonderful weather we had at home last year, quite a large number of people are going to stay in Britain?
Yes, a lot of people. They're too frightened to go abroad because they think there will be bombs on aeroplanes or whatever it might be, so they're going to have a holiday in the UK. The prices are going to be quite good because all the holiday homes and the other places that are around in the country are not going to be filled up with Americans because they're scared of coming to us, so the places are going to be empty. So I expect some bargains in the UK as well.
Now, Angela, can you tell me, what is the Holiday Care Service? Well, the Holiday Care Service is a charitable organisation, and we provide free information to people like disability groups, people that are in wheelchairs, perhaps one-parent families, and also families that are on a low income, and also deaf and deaf-blind people, for anyone really who wants to have information. Now, how do deaf people get in touch with you? Well, lots of people can contact us through telephone or by writing a letter to us, and we can provide the information for them then. Do you have Minicoms? Oh yes, we do have Minicoms. Now, the Minicom calls that you get from deaf people, what's the kind of advice that you offer? Well, people do ask us, for example, they need a holiday suitable for deaf children, or, you know, perhaps a family that's on a low income, they need special holidays, activity holidays, things like that. Perhaps they want to go abroad, or even in Britain, and they want to know even perhaps about self-catering holidays. Wow, that's quite a wide range. Now, what sort of holidays can you offer? Well, we're actually an information service. We provide the information. We're not travel agents. Now, are hoteliers becoming more aware of the needs of deaf people, and are you actually encouraging awareness? Well, yes, I try to advise them about deaf people's needs. If they want perhaps special aids and adaptations in their rooms, mini-coms, flashing fire alarms. And also the staff that can communicate with deaf people. That's really great. Thank you very much, Angela. Thank you. Thank you.
More information on today's items can be found in our fact sheet. Send a large, stamped, addressed envelope to the address that follows shortly and mark your letter Fact Sheet 20. And that's all for this week. Next week's programme is the last before we take a break, so be sure to join us then. Bye-bye for now.
Bye-bye.